Hi, my name is Taylor. The piece I have chosen is The Scream, painted by Edvard Munch in 1983. I chose this piece because I first came across this painting in my art class a week prior to our assignment, and it really spoke to me about how I have felt for the past few years of my life. Alone, isolated, anxious, and misunderstood. I once again came across this piece doing research for this assignment in the Google Art Museum. It also represented to me the state that I think a lot of people have been feeling since the pandemic started. The Scream is currently on display in Oslo, Norway at the Munch Museum of Art. The tragedies throughout Munch's life and the bouts with depression, anxiety, grief, and heartache led Munch to paint and draw many artworks that people still enjoy and relate to today. His works, which express his inner emotions and his own psychological struggles, are viewed as symbolism and expressionism, and I think that is very fitting. To really understand how the Scream came to be, we must first really know Edvard's life. Edvard once said, "Illness, insanity, and death were the black angels that kept watch over my cradle and accompanied me all my life." Edvard was born in Loten, Norway, December 12th, 1863. He was the second oldest out of 5 children. A year later, the family moved to Christiania, Norway. Christiania is now known as Oslo. At 5 years old, Edvard's mother died from tuberculosis, which sent his father into a deep depression. Munch's father, Christian, was a military doctor, and his grandfather was a Christian priest. Edvard stated, "My father was temperamentally nervous and obsessively religious, to the point of psychoneurosis." After Laura's death, Christian took a more prominent role in the children's life. His depression would seem to ease off at times and allow him to be a more playful father, but when the depression would sink back in, he would lash out in violent ways. Years later, Munch would go on to talk about how his father would seem to go insane for short periods of time. In 1877, 9 years after Laura's death, Edvard's older sister, Sophie, also died from tuberculosis at the age of 16. Later in life, he painted a piece called The Sick Child, expressing his feelings regarding how her illness and death affected him. He made a total of 6 of these paintings that were created over a 10-year time span. In 1879, Edvard went to technical college to study engineering. That year in school was when he created his first sketches. He left technical school and stayed in Christiania, where he began painting. Edvard was studying under Hans Olaf Heyerdahl and Christian Krogh for a year. Still staying in Christiania, he transferred to the Royal School of Art and Design, studying under Julius Middleton. These 3 painters helped sculpt the naturalistic painting style that Munch used for a few years. In 1884, Edvard sold his first 2 paintings, A Servant Girl, which is now called Morning because of the way the sun comes in the window, and Karen Bescholed in a rocking chair. Karen is Edvard's aunt who came to help the family after Laura's death. The money from these 2 pieces were to fund a trip to Antwerp, Belgium, and then to Paris. The trip was postponed due to an illness. Edvard also started his first relationship with a woman named Millie, who was a distant cousin's wife. In 1885, Edvard finally traveled to Antwerp and then on to Paris. In Paris is where Edvard encountered Claude Monet and Edouard Manet, which influenced his change in style to Impressionist art along with what he had learned from Krogh. In 1887, Millie abruptly ended the relationship, leaving Edvard depressed. Edvard stated, "I was on the brink of insanity. It was touch and go." In 1889, Munch had his first one-man show in Oslo that was very successful. He was offered a state grant to go to Paris and work on his drawings with Leon Bonnet. It was here that Edvard became very interested in post-impressionist artists Vincent van Gogh, Paul Cézanne, and Paul Gauguin. In November 1889, Munch's father died, and this yet again sent him into a bout of depression. He began heavily drinking. The effects were so intense that Munch couldn't paint for months. Munch's most famous pieces were painted in the series called The Frieze of Life in the years 1890 through 1900. When he began this series, he had written in his diary, "I shall paint living people who breathe and feel and suffer and love. I shall paint a number of pictures of this kind. People will understand the sacredness of it and will take off their hats as though they were in church." The paintings in this series are where Edvard mastered his combination of everything he had learned and taken his own emotions and connected them all together. This brought us Edvard's style of symbolism and expressionism. The paintings in this series that are the most well known are The Death in the Sick Room, Melancholy, Angst, Vampire, Madonna, and the painting I chose, The Scream. The original name of the painting, The Scream, was The Scream of Nature. The main figure in this painting was not actually screaming, but is actually responding to his surroundings and his mindset in that moment. When Edvard first painted this piece, he wrote a poem to go with it. I was walking along a path with two friends. The sun was setting. Suddenly, the sky turned blood red. I paused, feeling anxious, and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire above the blue-black forge and the city. My friends walked on, and I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an infinite scream pass through nature. Many historians believe that Melancholy could have been the first scream. There are many different versions of the scream before the most popular one we see today. Most of them I have tried to put in this video. There are still currently a total of 4 versions of the scream painted over a 17-year time period from 1893 to 1910. There is also 50 lithograph paints made in 1895. Each piece is slightly different from the other. One of the versions of the scream was stolen and auctioned off for $120 million in May 2012 and was recovered 3 months later with reportedly little to no damage. To date, this is still the most expensive painting stolen and sold. To speak of Edvard's mindset when he talked about this painting, he wrote in pencil in most of his scream paintings, "Can only be painted by a madman." Most paintings have them tucked in the clouds. This is expressing the realization that his mental state must have been very off at the time he painted these pieces.